Elite Prospects rankings are finally out for the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll break those down for you and talk about some surprises, some standouts on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakesh, joined by Sebastian and Hadi, and on today's episode, we'll be breaking down Elite Prospects rankings. There are some very interesting rankings for them, for the ones that they put out here as the early, as a first breakdown really of the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll start by breaking down the top 5, kind of talking through them and how we kind of compare in our early kind of process compared to them. We'll also talk about picks 6 through 10. There are some interesting ones in there as well. And then we'll end things off in our third segment by just kind of talking you through the latter half of the first round and, you know, some guys that really surprised us in terms of where they ended up on Elite Prospects rankings. The first rankings are really often an opportunity to kind of showcase players that you really like. It's an opportunity for you to look really good early on in the season, because if you look bad, it's not that bad. I mean, you at the end of the day, if you rank a player high and they end up lower on your board and on everyone else's boards by the end of the year, it's normal. But with those latter half first round picks, you got an opportunity to show like, hey, I really like this guy. And if you look good for it in a couple months, well, great. But yeah, we'll talk about all that more in detail. Before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So, Sebastian, any surprises at first overall here for Elite Prospects?
Shockingly, no. I think that the public scouting community as a whole is, at least for now, fairly unanimous in who the player at one is. And I know that we had a little bit of debate on that front a couple months ago, but at least to start the season, I don't think any players come close to being as impressive or as NHL projectable as Macklin Celebrini has been. So no shocker there, but definitely a good spot for an excellent prospect.
Absolutely. At second overall, though, a player we haven't seen much on any other rankings, but I'm glad to hear that Elite Prospects is on the same page as us as this. It's Ivan Demidov at second overall, the best handler in the draft, and it's not even fairly close. I mean, it's absurd the level of stick handling this player has. He's dynamic, he's elusive on the puck, he's able to wriggle his way out of trouble really well. And, you talk about a player who just dominates the game every puck touch he gets. I mean, I haven't seen a puck touch of Ivan Demidov where he's not trying something outside of the box. So it's very promising.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't think we have seen an MHL player in the last 3 to 4 drafts that has tried more things than Demidov tries at the MHL level. And that's saying something, because MHL forwards are always trying something, and it makes them entertaining to watch. Maybe a bit of a pain to scout sometimes, but very, very fun. And Demidov combines that fun factor with a plethora of very, very high-end tools. And I think that his hockey brain is one of the better ones in this draft class as well. He processes the game very quickly. He still needs to learn how to control his game a little bit more. He can still try a bit too much. He can bite off more than he can chew. I've seen him go solo on some plays, and he really, really can. But it doesn't always work. And there are definitely times where the wiser decision would be to maybe wait for some teammates to give him some support and to not overextend rushes. But with Demidov, especially at the MHL level, that doesn't really matter too much yet. But in terms of NHL projection, it's something to keep an eye on. But I think at second overall, we're definitely going to have a debate in our meeting, which is coming up next weekend at Dobber Prospects about second overall. I don't think it's going to be necessarily unanimous, but my sense is that I know the two of us will be pulling for Demidov in this same position, and we'll see what our other scouts have to say. But I'm curious to see what those debates unfold as. But as of right now, Demidov would also be my number 2. So no complaints so far on this board. And yeah, no, it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And at third overall is when the divergence starts. They have Cole Eiserman at third overall. To read a bit off their description of him, Eiserman is inevitable. The puck explodes off his stick, whether he's loading up a wrister, shooting off the catch, or one-timing from the circle. That's just spot on with Eiserman. I mean, he shoots the puck extremely well. We're talking about kind of an elite, borderline franchise level goal scorer. My issue with Eiserman is outside of that. I mean, he's a good off puck mover. That's definitely true. Um, but I don't see many of the power elements that I'd like to see so far from Eiserman. Although I've gotten higher on the surrounding skill, he's still able to push off opponents. He's still able to drop the shoulder, protect with his hand, drive the net, that kind of stuff. It's a bit more subtle with Eiserman than with other prospects. And my question is, I almost definitely have him at kind of the 5th, 6th overall range, kind of in the same tier as some of the guys that are ahead of him. But for me, there's a distinct issue with the way that he complements his skill set. His goal scoring is really good. His off puck movement is really good, but everything that leads up to going into the offensive zone, it's hit or miss for me. And I still need to see kind of those elements, but that just tells you how overwhelmingly good his goal scoring ability is. That he's still in my tentative top 6, despite those issues. Right? I mean, he's a fantastic prospect, but the real shocker so far is Cayden Lindstrom at 4th overall. The center from the Medicine Hat Tigers. He's off to a torrid start. I really like what he's been doing. And from what I understand, Cayden Lindstrom is a type of player who just absorbs information every game, because you see him every game add new things to his game, add new layers to his skill set. And Mitch Brown had a lot to say about him, eh?
Oh yeah, I mean, I texted a couple of the EP staff after these rankings got posted, and Lindstrom I think is the really big name that stood out at the high end of this
Yeah.
board. I mean, interestingly, Mitch was actually quite surprised as to how much, I guess, shock was kind of going around the scouting community about that ranking, because
Yeah.
everything that they've seen has screamed to them like top 4, top 5 talent.
Yeah.
And I went back and watched like a game and a half of Lindstrom right afterwards, just to kind of check him out a bit more in depth to see what exactly the EP staff is seeing in Lindstrom in that super high end range of this draft class. And I saw a lot of really interesting things. I don't think there's a player in the WHL who's more intelligent in how he uses his physicality to create advantages all over the ice. Lindstrom has developed his game a fair amount in the last like 6 to 8 months. Like I've gone back and watched D-1 tape, and where this season Lindstrom has been a really high-end playmaker, constantly looking to get the puck to the slot and completing a lot of those passes from what I've seen. Curious to see what Mitch Brown's data says about that in a couple months' time when that comes out. But last season, I remember thinking that like his vision was really impressive, but the actual completion rate of those high danger pass attempts was questionable. And I am pretty sure that Mitch Brown's data from last year also confirms that. But I've seen a lot of progression there, and as you said, I think that the rate at which he's able to absorb new information and add new tools to his toolkit is really impressive. And this is a player who is as intelligent as he is toolsy. He is very effective in transition this season from what I've seen. He's intelligent enough as well in transition to defer to his line mates that are better puck carriers than he is. Like Andrew Basha, for instance, is a very, very, very good transition forward in the WHL. And Lindstrom is constantly looking to use that tool as an advantage to get into the offensive zone, rather than kind of playing that solo-minded game, which I love to see. In the offensive zone, he's very effective at using his body not only to clog up the net front and be that screen, but to initiate contact off of defenders to create space for himself, whether he has the puck or not. And I've been very impressed so far. And while top 5 is still a little bit bullish for me at this point, he has entered my top 10, and I think he will feature right around that 8 to 12 range on our Dobber board as well for this ranking.
For sure. And to end things off with the top five, we have Sam Dickinson, the first defenseman off the board. No surprise there. He's incredibly good defensively, an extremely good skater. He's active offensively as well. He's comfortable carrying the puck. He's going to be a shutdown force at the next level, to quote elite prospects. And that's definitely true. The shot has impressed me a bit more as the season went on, but I'm still fairly impressed with the small area playmaking. So I'd be very shocked to see him not be the first defenseman off the board. But yeah, I've been fairly impressed with kind of that toolkit from him as well. But that's the elite prospects top five. We'll get into the picks 6 through 10 and break those down a bit more in detail. But first, a quick word from our sponsors over at Game Time. If you want to get last minute tickets to any event, whether that's sports, comedy, theater, anything that requires tickets, Game Time has you covered. They're my favorites in terms of picking up tickets because my schedule is very volatile. So I can find myself with a free afternoon out of nowhere, and Game Time comes in clutch when it comes to that. You can get tickets up to the last minute before the event, and even sometimes an hour after it starts, you can still get tickets for it. They've got really interesting deals, including zone deals where Game Time picks you pick the row and Game Time picks the seat, and that's an average about 18% of savings. According to US data. And the Game Time guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can see this view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you get there. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know exactly what deal you're getting without any hidden fees. So they're a really interesting option if you want to pick up tickets. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You download the Game Time app, create an account, and use a code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so moving on to picks 6 through 10 on Elite Prospects, brand new November rankings for the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll start with number 6 here with Artyom Levshunov, a prospect who we've deferred on a lot, and we've seen different opinions around the scouting sphere overall. But it seems like a lot of scouts are picking up on Levshunov and what he does well, and I can definitely see it as an incredibly toolsy defenseman. A lot of what he does offensively works really well. He's got a decent shot. He's able to find lanes really well and opens them up fairly well with that lateral mobility of his. He's extremely strong on the puck. He's up to 7 points in 8 games as a right-handed defenseman with Michigan State University in the NCAA. It's not the highest level of competition. It's one of the lower kind of divisions of the NCAA, but he's been playing really impressive hockey so far. And, you know, as of recently, you've had him in kind of what your 15 to 20 range, something like that. You mentioned the rigid upper body as kind of something that you're kind of turned off by in earlier episodes, but is there anything that could give you promise and kind of give you an indication as to why Elite Prospects has him at 6th overall? Because I can sort of see it, maybe not that high, but I can see it still.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've caught about like 2.5 in-depth viewings of Levshunov in the last like 3 months, which isn't all that much. So my takes on his front have been tempered. Like it's really still first impression, but it's just for me. I know that you've watched a fair amount more of him than I have so far.
Yeah.
But I think with Levshunov, the hockey brain, the intelligence really stand out very positively. I think in my viewings, the two big question marks that I had with him were his willingness to really get involved offensively, like by actually activating beyond the hash marks,
Yeah.
and his rigid upper body, as you mentioned. I've seen him get caught flat-footed because of that rigid upper body in his pivots, and that's been a little bit of a question mark in my mind. But those weren't the most in-depth viewings at all. And I've seen, I mean, like ranging from you to David Sod, who's our USA scout at Dobber, to EP, to a bunch of other scouts I've been talking to. A lot of people are growing on him this season with the NCAA footage, like really, really impressing them. So I'm not going to die on the hill of Levshunov outside the top 10 just yet. And honestly, considering that like how much you like him and how much David likes him, I expect him to end up inside our top 10 at Dobber as well. And I'm not
For
at
sure.
all against that. So
Yeah.
I have question marks, but I'm kind of looking from afar because I am focusing a little bit more on the European players this year while you are taking the bigger brunt of the NA workload. So I think I got off well there. I have a couple fewer players to have to delve deep into, which saved me some time.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, I mean, he's a decent player.
Yeah.
For me, he's around the 10 pick. Like that's where I'd have him as of right now. But obviously, we'll ramp up viewings as we approach this next weekend in our rankings. Moving on to number 7, we've got Berkly Catton of the Spokane Chiefs, a kind of slightly undersized, extremely skillful, extremely pacey player who plays with a lot of kind of on puck intensity. He accelerates the pace of play a lot on puck. Had a really impressive Hlinka Gretzky Cup. Was the clutch factor on Team Canada. Team Canada team that had an exceptional status player in Michael Misa on that team. He was outperforming them all. I'm not as impressed with the motor, the off puck game, and the defensive value as elite prospects are. They added those as kind of strengths to his game at the end. I don't really see that so far. I have big concerns about his passive off puck game defensively. His motor's really inconsistent. His defensive stick positioning isn't always there. But the skill set's definitely there. And, I would have him around the kind of 9 to 12 range, along with guys like Konsta Helenius and Artamonov Shunov and all that stuff. But speaking of Konsta Helenius, we've got him at 8th overall. Our Finnish scout, Annie Karvinen, is a big fan of his. And I understand why. He's got a great brain, right? I mean, he understands the ice and takes it in really well. And it's one thing to scan and to see around you, but it's another thing to understand what's going on around you. And I feel like that's a differentiating factor that Konsta Helenius has nailed down, in my opinion. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. His head's always on a swivel, and I think he's been a good example of one of the benefits that players that develop in Europe have over North American players, and that
Yeah.
is really needing to learn those scouting habits very, very quickly. Of course,
Mhm.
there are exceptions to that rule, but like guys like Yuri Slafkovsky, for instance, if he'd gotten a bit more time to learn that after being drafted, I do think that would have gone a long way
Mhm.
because in European leagues, you do have that extra bit of time and space, which allows players to really, really learn those scanning habits a lot more comfortably than in North American situations. And with Helenius, as I said, his head's always on a swivel, and
Mhm.
Annie's been mentioning that in her game reports as well. And I've been seeing a lot of the same. I think I still have a couple more questions on just how high end the offensive tools are. I'd like to see him be a bit more decisive with the puck on his stick in Liga. I can see him fading to the background some shifts, even inside the offensive zone.
Yeah.
But that said, the more recent viewings I've had of him have impressed me more than his early season viewings, which is great to see. Like that's the progression you want from players shaking off that summer rust. And he's also going to have a case to be made inside the top 10 for us. So I think that this is entirely within his range for EP. And yeah, Helenius is a fun, skilled offensive mind, and playing in a pro league is helping develop those professional habits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. At 9, I've got a bit of a question mark here in Ryder Ritchie. Left winger out of Prince Albert in the WHL. Um, the way elite prospects describe him, they talk about pace, give and goes, and a lethal wrister. I have a bit more questions about the translatability of his game. I see a bit more of a kind of junior style. But the play building is good. I just need to see a bit more maturity in his decision making. There's a lot of the things that he does where he's driving lanes that aren't there, that he's pushing wide on players instead of cutting inside. There's small things like that that I'd like to see on the puck. But when it comes to distributing and moving into space, it's really good, and that's a translatable skill. So we'll see how that develops for him, but I think 9's a bit too high for my liking so far. He's a guy that I kind of consider in the late teens, early 20s, but we'll see how that develops. And then finally, at 10th overall, Elite Prospects has Adam Juracek, and this is about right? I mean, this is more or less what we'd kind of expect from Adam Juracek, maybe even slightly lower. Um, Heading into the season, I think both us and Elite Prospects had him as kind of an early top 5 contender.
Yeah.
But he struggled massively so far in Czechia. He's a right-handed defenseman playing out of Czechia, and he has 0 points in 11 games at the pro level and 0 points in 3 games at the U20 level. And Czechia isn't necessarily the toughest league to produce in, so what gives there?
Yeah, it's been a rough early season for Adam Jiricek. I've been watching him a fair amount, and he's one of the more interesting case studies for me this year because of just the divergence between what I saw at the Hlinka, for instance, and what I'm seeing in any league play, whether it be in the Czech Pro League or in U20. And this season, the hesitation in Jiricek's game has been really concerning to me. I've had a lot of questions about, like, every single time, not every time, but quite regularly when he's facing heavy pressure, he completely hesitates, and he regularly loses those puck battles when he is having to, like, actually face that pressure and face it head on. And while, yes, this is a player who has some really intriguing physical tools, he is 6'1", 150 something pounds, but he is very strong. He plays a vicious style of hockey. He plays with physicality and violence. And hope with that is that once he adds another like 30 to 50 pounds to his frame in the next like 4 to 5 years, this could be a really, really violent defensive zone defender. And there are flashes of defensive brilliance with him that are really, really fun. Like, the aggression in his game is awesome. And EP really noted this in their blurb as well on Jiricek in this ranking. But I have a lot of questions, and at least as of right now, I believe my range for him is 12 to 20, which is lower than I was expecting to have him at this stage. And that is also just being fed by his pre-draft year results and viewings, because what I've seen so far this year, I'd have questions about first round upside, but we are 10 to 15 games into the season. It's still quite early. Not gonna do any too big knee-jerk reactions here just yet, but 10 is, at least as of what we've seen right now, I think a little bit optimistic for Jiricek, and could very well be right, and we could see him jump right back into that top 5 conversation as the year goes on, because the tools are really impressive too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that wraps things up for a second segment. Now we'll talk about picks 11 through 32. We've got a packed third segment for you here. We'll get into that right after these messages here from FanDuel, our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins, that you can use on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and more. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Whether you want to bet on Travis Kelce scoring a touchdown or Patrick Mahomes running for one, you can choose it all on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so ending things off with picks 11 through 32 in Elite Prospects rankings of the 2024 draft. We'll go through these fairly quickly. At 11th overall, I'm a big fan of this, Michael Brandzack-Nygård, and I think you've come around on that as well. He's a Norwegian winger, plays a power game, really knows how to drive the net extremely well. The defensive game is high end. The skating, the speed is really good as well. And he's just been growing his skill set with every game. So I've been fairly impressed with him, and no complaints there with him at 11th overall. But Zane Parekh at 12th is way lower than we have him. I mean, he's in contention with Sam Dickinson for us right now at Elite Prospects at 4th overall. So it's that one's a bit weird. But definitely understandable. Your take on Parekh has kind of stayed the same throughout the year. I mean, we're talking about an extremely skilled offensive defenseman, right?
Yeah, I don't think my takes on like really shifted on him since I first really started watching him with my live viewings in like last season. And he's one of my favorite players in this draft class of scout. I can understand why EP has them a bit lower. Like, this is a player who in previous seasons definitely had a lot of flashes of defensive mishaps, whereas this season it's been very, very, very solid to start off. I think our ranking is betting on that continuing, and EP is waiting for that sample to increase in size before they bump him up their board, because the difference in Parex's value, if he is a pure offensive defenseman versus a high-end two-way defenseman, is quite different. And I think that these rankings reflect that. So I'm curious to see how it goes on this season, but I know that Lauren Kelly, EP's OHL scout, is a massive fan of Perek as well. So definitely likely that Perek rises up that board if his performances continue as they've started this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, we have Anton Silayev at 13, 6'7", left-handed defenseman out of Torpedo. He's playing top minutes in the KHL, playing really well.
Mhm.
Just about what you'd expect from him here. I mean, there's on and off questions about his defensive engagement, his ability to read plays. He sometimes has some weird decisions on the puck. Really inconsistent performances, but when he's on, he looks like a top 10 pick. So I'm not complaining there either. But the big surprise for me here is Tij Iginla at 14th. Jerome Iginla's son. He plays for the Kelowna Rockets. He's paired with Andrew Crystal in Kelowna, and that combo's been working really well. Really good goal scorer, really good off puck mover. I've been more and more impressed with the off puck movement, with the motor and all that good stuff. But he still has some ways to go before he cuts their top 15. I think here at Elite Prospects. Then Trevor Conley is almost exactly where I'd have him at 15th overall. Extremely skillful playing in Tri-City. Extremely skillful on the puck. Really deceptive. Really elusive with the puck. Extremely pacey as well. But the type of player that you could see develop his game in decent ways. Right now, he plays a bit more that junior style, but the skill set's undeniable, and his Holinka Gretzky Cup viewings really put him on the map, right? I mean, we're talking about a player who's got it in terms of skill set. But talk me through Liam Greentree at 16th overall. That's a bit high for my liking as well. What's your take on Greentree so far?
I don't mind this ranking, honestly, from what I've seen so far. I'm going to catch a live viewing tomorrow, well, Sunday. We're recording this on Saturday.
Yeah.
And I'm really going to focus in on him there. But so far, what I've seen from Greentree has been a highly intelligent and powerful forward who is quite versatile and really, really cerebral in how he leverages his tools in different situations. He plays slightly different styles against different competitions. He adjusts how he plays the game to the competition, which I adore to see in prospects. That versatility, that adaptability is great, and he's at 5 points over a point a game so far in the OHL this season, and he's been really, really fun to watch. So while this is the high end of his range in my mind, this isn't an unreasonable ranking either.
Perfect. So that's good. Other than that, we have Igor Chernyshov at 17th overall. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast, so you guys know how we feel about him. He'd be definitely higher on our rankings. But I'd say he's around, the later half of the later kind of range of his rankings would probably be around 12, 13, right? So I think this is reasonable, yeah. Other than that, Zeev Buyum at 18th overall, a defenseman out of the Denver program in the NCAA. Really young and playing really good minutes in Denver against NCAA competition. He's been really impressive on the puck. His mobility is extremely impressive. He's able to close gaps really well. I mean, I don't have any complaints with this. Zeev Buyum is a player who isn't really talked about as much, so he's definitely a player that we're going to kind of discuss a lot more as the season goes on. But early viewings for me have been really decent for Zeev Buyum. But then at 19 we have Nikita Artamonov, a player that I was really impressed with. He plays in the same program as Anton Silayev, Torpedo, in the KHL. He's playing really good minutes in the KHL, and he has decent production so far. You saw a bit less paciness in his game, saw a bit less kind of drive to kind of evade opponents and all that, but the motor's good, the skill set's good, the playmaking's good, the shooting's good. I mean, there's a lot to like in his game, right?
So much to like. I think like the things that really stood out to me in my first viewing and a half of him, apart from my passing viewings of Silayev, were really the playmaking and the intelligence that really, really stood out to me, especially at the KHL level. Artamonov stood out to me every single shift as one of the more creative players on the ice with the puck on his stick. Can find really, really interesting passing lanes and can actually create them through complex situations, even like through multiple layers of defenders. He loves to carry the puck and shift defensive structures to create those openings. And EP wrote exactly that in here. So I fully agree. I think that this is entirely his range. I think I have him that 14 to 20 range as well. So 19 is perfectly within that. And the playmaking is a ton of fun. So the production's been great. Playmaking has been great. There's definitely room for him to move up draft boards from this point onwards as well. Like, he's a very fun player.
Absolutely, and to end things off with the top for the top 20, we've got Luke Misa 20. Not a surprise given that Lauren Kelly's the OHL scout.
Nope.
And another really good Mississauga Steelhead. The pace on him is insane. I mean, he plays the game at such a high speed, process it at a high speed. I have a bit more questions about the defensive game and the overall impact in terms of motor, in terms of off puck movement, but everything on the puck and in terms of transitions, no complaints with Luke Misa, right? So like, yeah, this is not surprising at all, and I think this is a really decent top 20. And we'll go through picks 21 through 32 on tomorrow's episode as we continue this breakdown and talk a bit about some other rankings as well. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And again, tune in tomorrow. We'll continue with these rankings and talk about Corey Pronman's rankings as well, and kind of how they compare to what we're kind of looking at early on in the season. So this has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.